Recording, and then I'll go ahead and start
The
the
broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, and welcome to today's PASS Business Intelligence Virtual Chapter webinar for today. Steve Wake is going to be presenting. I do have a few announcements I would like to make before we get started. Just a real quick reminders, we do record all the sessions, and usually it takes about a week for everything to get downloaded and uploaded to the right places, so you can go ahead and review the presentation after the fact. Just wanted to go ahead and mention too, Pragmatic Works is our sponsor for the Business Intelligence Virtual Chapter, and we're very appreciative of the sponsorship they provide us with. Just a couple additional announcements is that the PASS BA Business Analytics Conference is coming up soon, and if you use that code that's on the screen, the BAVC05, you can get $150 off your registration. We are still working on the Service Pro giveaway. Some of y'all may have remembered we were asking for some feedback concerning the virtual chapter and communication and such, and they're still going through the entries for that. Some future things, of course, SQL Saturday coming up around the world. If you get an opportunity to attend, it is a wonderful opportunity, wonderful learning opportunity, and you can visit SQLSaturday.com in order to register for a location near you. This is the virtual chapter meetings that are coming up that are outside of the business intelligence arena, so some things to make note of for the future. This is a real quick listing of the virtual chapters that are out there. If you ever would like to get information about them, go to the PASS website, and then you can actually modify your profile and join one of these virtual chapters. Again, a good thing to do. I'm a member of multiple ones. If you have a specific volunteer that you know is doing an exceptional job, we would also appreciate you to recognize them. And there's some information here on the screen right now about recognizing a particular volunteer. And again, you can go to the PASS website for any information on that if you want to do that. Again, a little bit of a plug for the Business Analytics Conference. It's going to be in San Jose. Remember that $150 off coupon that's available for you to use. So I got all the announcements out of the way, and now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Steve. I'm going to make him the presenter, and we'll take a few seconds to switch over to his desktop, and then once we do that, we'll go ahead and get the presentation going. So Steve, go ahead and take it away.
All right, great. Thanks everybody for attending today for our session on the virtual BI conference, or virtual BI group, and my presentation actually, for those of you who don't know, is the master of the date dimension like a Time Lord, and some people have figured out the reference, but we'll talk about more about that in a second. But my name is Steve Wake. I am a Senior Business Intelligence Consultant with Pragmatic Works, and I also, on the side, I'm also the president of the Denver SQL Server User Group. So any of you that are in the Denver area, you're probably familiar already with me if you've come to meetings in the last couple of years. I've been president of the group now for over 2 years. Just started my second 2-year term as president, so glad to host as many people as we can out here in the Denver area. If you're ever in the area, please feel free to shoot me an email as well if you'd like to. If you are a speaker or something and you'd like to speak in our group, that would be great as well. I'm always willing to have people come out and speak to our group, so you can always reach me at swake@pragmaticworks.com. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me, and I'm also on Twitter at Steve Wake, so it's nice and easy to remember. And then I'm on LinkedIn, G+, Facebook, all of the above. Feel free to shoot me out a connection request if you want to connect up with me on LinkedIn or anything. I pretty much have an open network when it comes to that stuff. So anyway, on with the actual fun here. So I've had already a couple people in the questions actually have figured out what the references are in the title of the presentation. For those of you who are a little bit more into sci-fi, or more specifically British sci-fi, there is a show out there called Doctor Who that I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. It actually airs in the U.S. on BBC America as well. But if you go out to drwho.com, I'm sure you'll get the fill of it. But I kind of based this presentation on that because last year was actually a big anniversary for that show. So I have a little slide here that helps with that. Not sure if all that sound came through over there, but that was the sound of the infamous spaceship that the Doctor Who uses with what is called the TARDIS, which is his way to travel through time. And last year was the 50th anniversary of Doctor Who. It was actually the November timeframe last year that the show had been on for 50 years. So it was a pretty big anniversary for that show. So I like to theme my presentation around, especially since my presentation was about the date dimension. So that worked perfectly with someone who does time travel. So got to combine two things that I really like into one presentation here. So now we'll get into kind of the actual meat of the presentation here. But first thing is, what is a date dimension? So if you've never set up a data warehouse before or never needed to, this is all review of why you would need a date dimension set up in your data warehouse. First thing is, of course, it tracks dates. It's called a date dimension, so it tracks dates. Usually what you will set up, as you'll see in the demonstration I'll have, is you'll have like a row per day is the typical way most people set up their date dimension. And it'll have all the details for that day. So you'll have a bunch of different columns, and I'll actually have a script that I'll make available to everyone as well that creates the date dimension that I've started to use at all kinds of other client sites. This is a script that actually I built as I worked at another client that gave me permission to actually use it. So it's a great setup. It was actually converted from Oracle into SQL Server. But it works very well, as you'll see, because it's got a lot of great detail in it. The other thing you can do with a date dimension is actually track different calendars within that same date dimension. So the typical thing for most people is you have your Gregorian calendar, which is just regular January through December type calendar that we pretty much all follow on a daily basis. But you can also then take into account Julian calendars too. So for Julian calendars, there is you're just tracking the day and the year basically, but that's something else you can also track, which I'll show in the sample I have as well. And then the other big one is a fiscal calendar, of course. So that's the calendar that maybe your company follows that doesn't follow the regular Gregorian calendars. So a lot of companies, their fiscal calendar goes from September to October or something like that. So those are the kind of things you can think about also tracking within your date dimension that might help with any of the reporting that you do within your systems on a regular basis. Time is something that I'm not going to totally address within this presentation. It's something that I've thought about adding. Sometimes the presentation takes longer than others depending on the questions I get and stuff. But a time dimension is actually usually pretty easy to set up within a data warehouse, depending on what your granularity needs to be for that dimension. If you're like most, maybe what I'd say typical companies, you probably don't need to track any lower than maybe minutes. So the time dimension would just be a fixed table that was set up that had a row per minute with it covering just the 24 hours. Would be how you could do that. Is an easy way to set up a time dimension. So it's very simple to set that up, and it's usually pretty fixed in time as far as, there's only ever going to be 24 hours in a day. So the time dimension tends to be a lot simpler to set up, which is kind of why I don't necessarily cover it as much as the date dimension. Date dimension tends to be used a lot more than a time dimension. And as I mentioned kind of at the top when I was talking about this, you're usually, with your date dimension, setting up a row per day or date, depending on how you want to think about it in this table that you're going to use as the date dimension. A little bit more about time dimension. As I kind of mentioned, it's going to depend on your application as to how you might want to set it up. Are you going to set it up at hour, minute, second level, even smaller than seconds possibly? But just know that you just have to cover 24 hours within that time dimension. You don't have to cover all the time, all the way back to wherever you're starting from with your particular date dimension. You don't need to go and repeat the same 24 hours over and over again for each day. You would just have it as a completely separate table from your date dimension to make it so that it was the most flexible setup possible. One thing that may cause some twists in your particular issues with the setup of a time dimension is time zones. So you may want to put in columns that indicate what the times are in other time zones if you need to keep track of that, which means you probably need to then determine, are you going to use maybe UTC or some kind of Greenwich Mean Time, whatever it gets called. I keep changing the name of what it is, but the main time zone that basically everybody sets their time zones against. Is that going to be what you're going to track your time in as your main time in your time dimension, and then have the other columns to track the other ones, keeping in mind that throughout the year, of course, different areas of the country change from daylight savings time, and some don't even do daylight savings time. So that does make that kind of a setup a little bit more complicated when it comes to time zones if you're going to do a time dimension. And so then the big question is, now that you know what they are, why do you need them? So, in most cases, of course, the biggest reason for needing a date and or a time dimension is that you're going to be doing reporting by that. Almost everybody does reports by some kind of date or time. That's kind of just standard business when it comes to how to set things up within when you're doing any kind of reporting, is it's typically done over a period of days or hours. So that's kind of the main reason why it's there. The other thing that's kind of interesting about using date dimensions specifically is about tracking holidays and other significant dates. Now that people are getting into a lot more of this analytical type stuff with reporting and all the other stuff they do with their data, you might be interested in actually specifically marking what are the holidays in your date dimension, so that then as you're doing analysis you can actually say, well, I wonder how our sales compared from Christmas this year to Christmas last year, and then be able to maybe even do data mining and models that basically can predict, hopefully, what your Christmas will be like the next year, maybe, stuff like that. So actually indicating holidays in your date dimension helps to be able to do that kind of analytics type stuff in the future. So it's just something to think about. In the script that I'll show you actually does include the capability of indicating holidays when you set it up across decades worth of dates if necessary. And the thing you'll see with the way I do the script that I'll show you is that it does all the date calculations are mainly done within this dimension. Some people, when they've looked at this, question why there are so many columns necessary in it, but the main reason for all of these columns that I'll have in this date dimension is to make it so that when you go to use this information in your reports or any other application that you need to use the date information for, you don't have to go through converting it to a different format into an int to do math on it, stuff like that. A lot of the different columns will have different data types so that they all make it so that when you're building the date dimension, all those calculations are done for you. So you're going to see that it's going to put stuff into many different formats that you may think you may never need, but why not just put it into this script, let it go out there that way, and then you don't ever have to worry about doing it again. It'd be up to you to then determine which ones of the columns you do and don't use, and the rest of them just sit out there, and you never know. In the future you might need them. You may come up with a particular date calculation you hadn't thought of, and thankfully or hopefully what is in there in the date dimension will already cover that. The big other thing, of course, is to do, as I mentioned with the holiday type of thing, is to do period comparisons. So by having a date dimension that actually can cover decades worth of dates makes it a lot easier when you've linked that up with your particular transactions in your data warehouse to then be able to do period over period comparisons across all of that data, so that you don't have to try to do some kind of date math to stretch that out into further time periods. My idea is I'll typically come in and run this script and actually generate maybe 50 years worth of a date dimension all at once. It's like, why not? I mean, it only takes about, as you'll see when I run it, 10 seconds or less for the way the script is set up to actually have it generate an entire table of dates that covers a 50-year time period. So those are the kind of things that once you've built it out, you hopefully can just forget about it and never have to deal with it ever again. And then, as I just mentioned, generate for years and decades very easily if you have it in a script that's set up ahead of time. So there are some different types of dimensions, date time dimensions that people will set up. Sometimes they'll do a calculated one where it's actually kind of like what you'll see that I have. Is mine is kind of more of a little bit of a combination of a calculated and a custom physical. But a calculated one typically means that you are doing, like I said, all of these weird date calculations actually within the script itself so that you don't have to worry about trying to do those inside your reports or other applications that may use it. So that's kind of the idea behind calculated ones, is to take all that kind of information out of the report, out of the, whatever you're going to use it with, and actually put it into the script so that it's just done once and done correctly there. Another type is tool created, and by far probably the most commonly used tool to create a date dimension is probably Excel, especially with some of the new functionality that they've introduced in the newer versions of Excel, probably like 2010 and 2013, where you can just put January 1st 2000 into the first cell and then just do the drag down in Excel and actually generate, however many years worth of dates that you need. It'll just auto increment the dates automatically for you and do it that way. Then you can from there use the tools within Excel to actually then create some of the other columns, break it down by month, by day, by year, stuff like that. So you can do it within Excel. I know a lot of people do that, and then actually take that data and push it out into a database table. I go kind of down the route more of, like I said, more of the custom physical, where it's actually a physical table that actually exists in SQL Server with my own set of columns that I've come up with and that came out of this particular script I built for a client that breaks everything down as well. So I tend to be more in line with doing a custom physical. And then, of course, there's always the hybrid version where you take little bits of each of these to actually put them in. Because sometimes where I've come into places that have strange fiscal year calendars, it does take a little bit more work to figure out how to get that fiscal calendar to work across many years, or to even come up with how to calculate it if it's a really strange fiscal year calendar. Sometimes you have to use some very specialized tools to actually get it to create all those dates for you correctly and get them loaded into the data, into the date dimension. So just some things to think about when you're building out your date dim, as I've kind of gone through some of these things in previous slides. But some of the big things to think about, especially the interesting. And then you can also do, as I already said a couple times, make sure you can specify the Gregorian, Julian, and fiscal calendars all across in separate columns within the same table. And you'll see that in the sample that I'll show you here in a few minutes as well. And then we have all the calculated type stuff too. And this is where the real power comes into play, because these are the type of things you may not think you need today, but tomorrow, who knows. But you can do like the day number in the week. So instead of putting Monday, you could put, depending on when you want the day of the week to start. You know, some places it starts on Sunday, some places it starts on Monday or whatever. You can then calculate what is that day number in the week instead of storing just the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday type reference. The day number in the month, which gets you more into just like day number in year is more of a Julian type setup. You can do day number in month as well. And sometimes that falls into a little different category with fiscal too, because some places work on fiscal weeks that feed into fiscal periods, which changes how some of these calculations would work on a fiscal level as well. So you can think about that too, not just these calculated measures being just for the Gregorian or Julian calendar, but make sure you think about them being repeated as well for the fiscal calendar too, because those things do change quite a bit. All right, so enough of the talking with slides. Now we'll switch over to the actual script. So as I said, I'll make this script available. Probably the best place I'll put it is probably be out in my blog, and actually I've updated the presentation since I did it last month out at the Albuquerque SQL Saturday, so I'll make sure to provide a new blog post out there later today that has the latest version. But I have the script in two versions because there's actually one particular reference that I had in the script that is a 2012 T-SQL only component, but then I created a 2008 version to fix that as well, so just know that that's what's out there too. So the first part of this script actually assumes nothing as far as setup, other than that you have a database called EDW, so that was just meant to be shortened for Enterprise Data Warehouse. You can change that to actually whatever you want, and then it actually is going to create a couple of schemas that's going to store some of the stuff in. So some of the stuff you can kind of modify to be how you're used to doing things. You may not, like to use schemas. You're fine with using just DBO for everything. So that'll be completely up to you as to how you set this up once. Like I said, I'll provide the script out on my blog so that you can then take it and do what you want with it from there. But the first thing it does, like I said, is create this util schema, and then it's going to, if some of these functions already exist, it's going to delete them and then recreate them. So the first big function that it does is a real handy one that I also found online as well, that you can use for tracking those holidays that fall on a specific day of the week, on a specific week of the year type of setup. So like Thanksgiving is a really good example of a holiday that always falls on a specific Thursday of the year. You can use this function actually just to figure that out. You're just going to pass into it what the weekday that you're wanting to find out about, the occurrence of the week within that month, and then the year and the month all get passed in as parameters into the function, and then it will return back the date time that particular holiday would fall on then. So that's kind of a cool function that does that for you. And then, as I mentioned, I have this function that calculates Easter, so it's going to drop that first if it's already there. Like I said, the script is built in a way that the idea is if you need to change anything, you add your changes to it, and then you completely rerun it, from the top. It's kind of the idea to rebuild it. So in this one with Calculate Easter, all you got to do is pass in the year, and it will actually do the calculation to tell you the exact day that Easter is. And I'm not sure how easy it is to see. I'll zoom in on this actual calculation. It's kind of clever, but some NASA engineer actually figured this out. I certainly would never be able to figure out some kind of calculation like this, but it does, because Easter is actually based on the lunar calendar. It's not based on the regular Earth calendar. So that's the challenge, is that apparently this, whatever all of this does, somehow takes into account the orbit of the moon to be able to then figure out what the day of Easter is. So I thought that was very clever that it was all handled within a actually fairly simple, if you think about it, calculation there to get it. But I've tested it out for hundreds of years, and it actually is correct every single time. So it's pretty amazing that through just that function you can actually do this. I think actually I'll increase my font size a little bit here and make it a little easier for you guys to see as I scroll through it. So then the next thing it does after the functions is it creates this core schema. So the core schema is actually the schema that the actual date dimension table itself is going to live in. And then there's a whole bunch of extended properties on every single column in this table. So you can take a look at that. It drops them all here at the beginning, and then we'll see when it actually creates the table how it recreates them. But then the first part, so then we get into the actual creation of the table, and you'll see there's a lot of columns. So I'll just kind of quickly scroll. So you can see there's tons of columns in it, and they're all of many varying different types. Starting off though with that primary key that I mentioned is the top one here, which is the date ID that I've got in an int format. So that's an important one. The sort order number is a little bit unique to this particular setup. I'll kind of get into that more as we actually see the data flowing into it, but it's a very specific column that's used to handle some of the stuff that this particular client had. You can kind of determine if you need that type of column or not in your setup. And then from there we just get into all these different formats of mainly in this first part just the Gregorian calendar. One of these days I'll go in and actually change the script so that some of these are spelled out a little bit more to make them a little bit easier to figure out what their formats are. But they do have the extended properties actually have samples of what each of these formats look like. So that goes through, and then it switches over after you get through all the calendar stuff, and then you get into the whole fiscal stuff. So all the fiscal items are all tracked separately. So there's a whole another set that basically you can see mimics the stuff that's up there for the Gregorian calendar, is all down here in the fiscal calendar as well, doing some of the exact same formatted versions and just the numbers themselves as well. And then you'll also notice mixed in on both setting for it for unknown. We actually just, instead of doing not applicable for that row, we actually do unknown. And that's the only null handling role that we actually put into this particular date dimension for the client I'm at now. But in this case, there were 4 different versions, one that's not applicable, one that's not available, an unknown, and an error value. So depending on your use, you could get rid of those rows pretty easily. It just goes through and does an insert of values all the way across that match up for each of those. And this is kind of where that sort value comes into play. So you'll notice the first row is using 0, the second one's using 1, then 2, then 3. So those are just a way to keep track of those, and then you can keep adding. If you did need more for whatever reason, you could add those as well and just increase that sort value to put them all in the right order if you're curious about that kind of stuff. And then we get into the bulk of it. This rest of it is then the insert actually into that date dim. So it declares a whole bunch of variables. This one does just a very basic fiscal calendar, so it's just assuming the fiscal calendar is, you know, like I said, kind of starting on a different day of the month. It's not going to do any of the weird 445s, any of that kind of stuff in the fiscal calendar. You would have to actually figure out how to calculate those yourself and add that into this script. It's just a pretty basic fiscal calendar. Client I'm at now actually does the 13 periods in a year format, which was a little different for me as well. And that one, we had to come up with the custom calculation to fill that one in too. So there's so many different fiscal calendars, it's almost impossible to make one script that can do them all. But if somebody's out there and knows how to do that, I'd be curious to see the script because it would be pretty cool. But you'll see when it does the regular dates, it's setting the sort number by default for all the dates to 9, so all the dates show up in this grouping of sort number of 9. And like I said, if you don't think you need that sort number, feel free to leave that column out. It's kind of up to you. It's just more there just to make the database table look nice, I guess, more than anything. Then you need to set the start and the end dates that you want to use for when you want the dates to start and then when you want the dates to end for it to create within the date dimension. As I mentioned with the fiscal, it's pretty basic. You're just saying, what is my fiscal starting month? In this case, it's October 1st, so their fiscal calendar in this case runs from October 1st to end of September each year as their fiscal calendar. So then it does some calculations based on that to give us the actual start dates and end dates for that, so that it's looping through correctly and doing a fiscal calendar. And then from there it starts doing the parts one by one of each of the columns and doing all those necessary calculations. So to build the date key, it's doing some casts to break things apart. There might be easier ways to do that, but this was just the way at that particular time to actually break it all apart and actually add it all back up, because the problem is that our date time is in date time format, so we have to pull it apart using them as strings to then be able to recombine it and then cast it back into an int. So kind of a pain to pull it apart and re-add it, but it is what it is. Then it does similar date calculations and formats for all of the different columns, so it's going through and doing the appropriate substrings as necessary, and you know, any of these can be tweaked as you need. Does a weekday indicator. That's just a simple case statement looking for what day of the month it is. Hopefully you guys aren't seeing my screen blink like I am. For some reason my screen keeps blinking. Very strange. And then the really cool section as well of this is the holiday indicator. So there's a holiday indicator column on there, and I only had a single holiday, just you know, mainly doing U.S. holidays. And then all it does is just indicate through a bit if it is a holiday or it isn't, based on it does all these calculations. And kind of the cool thing that the client had already in the script that I just went ahead and pulled across is some history lessons actually in these holidays too. There's some interesting things. holidays that it flags in a separate section down here for Columbus Day, which is always the second Monday of October. Washington's birthday, which actually I think we just had not too long ago, was the third Monday. Actually, that's coming up next week, I guess, is President's Day. The third Monday of February is always a holiday for that, for President's Day. And then it's got Veterans Day as well. So, any other, international type holidays that you need to do, you could hopefully come up with similar calculations to figure them out. The other thing I have at the current client since tweaked as well, this just is a Boolean column. It doesn't actually tell you what the holiday is. So I have since, which I'll probably eventually tweak this script to, is go in and add another column that's basically just a description of the holiday, and then go through basically the, it sets, puts in some text that basically says like Easter observed, or New Year's Day observed, all that type of stuff is the type of things that you can add into that kind of a description column. All right, so then from there it just continues on with the rest of the other columns that are in this particular date dimension the way it's set up right now, doing lots of different formatting. We keep going through all the different columns here, and then we're going to finally get into the fiscal. So then we finally switch over after we're done with that and switch into the fiscal stuff. So it sets up some of the similar calculations just using that particular date in there, and it looks like some of this stuff is hard-coded that probably needs to be updated as well. This was, like I said, set up for a specific client at the time, so it just needs to be made a little bit more dynamic to make the fiscal calendar work 100% off the parameters provided. But those are some of the things that can be tweaked fairly easily. It does some, formatting that says like the quarter, when you're doing fiscal quarters and stuff like that to make it look nice. You could choose whether you need to put the leading zeros in. This one doesn't do the leading zeros on any of that information. It just does the, just puts it in as Q1 instead of Q01. That's kind of a formatting thing for different people, have different preferences there. And then that's basically it. Like I said, it just loops through based on the start and end date that you specify up here at the top of the script, and just loops through and keeps doing that same thing over and over. So if I actually execute this now, and like I said, it only takes it a few seconds to actually run. Doesn't take very long at all, depending on the server you run it on. Of course, I'm running it inside a virtual machine right now. But there it says it completed in about 11 seconds. If we come out to that EDW tables core date dim and do a select on it, kind of gives you an idea what it looks like. So it flagged the first date there. There's the primary key that I specified with that sort order number if you actually care about it, and then all the columns are specified out. Whoa. And my screen just, it did kick me out. That's weird. Sorry about that. My VM just did something to me there. Very strange. And actually reset, it looks like. That was like a reboot. That was very strange. Gotta love Windows. It did that to me in my other VM earlier today, so I guess it's just something that it's throwing me off today. So anyway, back to the script here. We'll just relaunch that script. Connect, and back to where we were browsing it. You'd think that I could tell the system I'm doing a presentation, don't do any updates. But of course, Windows overrides all that stuff. So anyway, back to where we were. So we were kind of looking at all the different columns here. You kind of see there's all the different formatting. In this case, it's doing dashes. If you needed to do slashes or something, you could change all that fairly easily. Oh, come on, it's still blinking at me. What is it doing to me? All kinds of other stuff. There's the calendar quarters specified in there as well. And if we get over to, if we actually go over to the fiscal stuff, you can actually see the fiscal calendar is set up to work correctly with this stuff as well, based on whatever fiscal calendar is set up, of course. In this case, it was that September to October type of setup, and it actually flags some of that end of year information as well. And then the other thing that was important was that holiday indicator, which is right here, indicating when the holidays are on each of these. So in the year 2000, or 2001, the New Year's Day actually fell on a Monday, so that was the holiday. Then as you scroll through, you'll see all the different ones flagged elsewhere as well for each of the holidays. So it calculated all the holidays all the way out, for the entire 30 years that I set this up for. So that's kind of how that whole script works. And like I said, I'll put a blog post out there with both my slides and the both versions of the script so that everybody has those available to download after the fact. And my blog is at wakebi.com. If you're looking for that, I'll type that out in here on Notepad so that you guys can actually see it, because I know that sometimes sound doesn't always come through like we'd expect, so I'll just type it and zoom in on it. And you can, whoa, that zoomed to an extreme, didn't it? And then also I'll put that, I should put my email address on there too, so you guys have that. Oops. And then after we do this, we can actually take some questions. I know I've seen that some of the questions have been flying in there. And I'll put my Twitter handle as well. So those are all the different ways you can get a hold of me. And like I said, I'll put that out there, the stuff out there on my blog later today. It may not be till late this afternoon, and then eventually I'll update it once the recording becomes available. I'll actually put that out there as well for all of you to be able to get that all from one place if you're looking for the recording as well. But anyway, that's all I had for that. So I will, I don't know if we want to joint handle the questions or how we're going to do the questions here, but I think there's quite a list. I'm trying to figure out how to get through here. Let's see. Wow, there are a lot of questions here. All right, so there's that. Where did I mark? I don't know how to make this window bigger. Work for marketing analytics versus a weeks is the lowest level of granularity for time, with 4-week months and 13-week quarters and 52-week years. Yeah, that sounds like that would be quite a pain, but you should still be able to break that down within the date dimension as well. Like I said, I think that's pretty similar to the fiscal calendar I'm actually working with at a current client as well. They do 13 periods in a year with 4 weeks in each period, I think is how that works. So it kind of throws off the end of the year. The end of the year is like December 29th or 30th sometimes, so it cuts off the end of the year earlier. Are ISO weeks part of a Gregorian calendar? I don't know what an ISO week is. I've never heard of that before. 445, I already mentioned that. Yeah, it's not really handled in the script the way I have it now, but you should be able to add that to it fairly easily. If you generate 50 years, and you might have to hide them again at the end. Yeah, that is true. Martin brings up that if you generate that many dates, you may need to hide them from the user, which is definitely the case, that you may need to do that. If you're like putting it into a cube or something, you don't want them to see all 50 years that they could select from. But that's something that you can set up within the application to actually hide some of that stuff. Why would you use sort order number any different than date ID? I think I kind of explained that. It was more to handle the null handling null handling rows that occur in the data is the reason for the sort order number, just to kind of put them out of the way. Some objection to using tiny int, it would save space. Sure, yeah, if you wanted to save space. In my opinion, storage is cheap nowadays, so it's better than the way it was originally, because this was a Oracle script, so it was using numerics everywhere. I've since converted most of those to ints, so it's using a lot less space than it was when I first took over the script. Said that was answered. Where and how to get the blog, I said that. There's cast strings in uppercase before before making corrections. Looks like the habit of yeah. So Brian Brown picked up on the fact that it does a lot of casting to uppercase and stuff. So yes, that is the leftovers of it coming as an Oracle script. So that was stuff that I haven't yet converted. Actually, at the client I'm at now, I did get rid of all the uppercasing. I actually prefer the initial casing over uppercasing everything. Are the building blocks of the Julian calendar also part of the script? So the Julian stuff is there. It's all just buried inside the calendar columns, but there is the day of year stuff in here, and then there's some where it just shows the day and the year that would fall into the Julian calendar in here. So they are part of the columns that are in here. It's just maybe hard to find. There's day and year number, and then there's also going to be probably the other way around somewhere in here too. And there's year and month. There should be a year and day where it actually has the year first and the day. So and if it doesn't, it's easy enough to add. Those are the kind of things that if you really do care about the Julian stuff, easy enough to throw those in there. And Kevin was saying what TARDIS means, time and relative dimension in space, yep, which is correct. And I will make the slides available. Not sure what 13, oh, he was talking about the periods and stuff, yeah. Yeah, the math is kind of funky on those periods. Martin specified what an ISO week is. For example, January 1st can belong to the previous calendar week as December 31st, sorry, part of the next calendar week year. Oh, wow. So, yeah, that kind of stuff, if you need to do ISO weeks, as long as you got the calculation, know how to figure it out, you could put that kind of stuff in there. Best way to determine what could be the correct comparison day in last year. If you're looking at comparing, oh, and actually specified more down below, you need to compare Wednesday versus the nearest Wednesday around that date. Well, I would hope, based on the amount of stuff that's in this date dimension, it would make it easier because it does have a specific column that just tells you if it's Wednesday or not. So if you go back a year, you should be able to do that pretty easily as well. You should be able to figure that out based on the columns that are available. Unfortunately, you're going to have to probably do some math for that. You could add columns, and I have seen people do date dimensions that have previous year, previous quarter type of stuff built into the dimension as well, which you know, no issues why you couldn't do that. Best practice about build up a date dimension in SSAS. Well, I've used this script here with some modifications is actually the date dimension I'm using in the analysis services cube I'm building for the client I'm at right now. So so far as I've seen, it works perfectly to use this in analysis service. Of course, I'm not exposing every single column in that cube. I'm only exposing the ones that make the most sense. And then, like somebody else mentioned, I'm generating it for them for like 50 years, so I would have to hide some of the dates they aren't using. Their business really didn't start till 2013, or not 2013, but 2011, I think, is their earliest date. So I did generate it back to the year 2000, but I'll probably just hide all those earlier dates so they don't show up in the filter list. All right, I think that's all the questions I see in the question queue, so I don't know if there's anything else. If not, then we can close it up 5 minutes early, although I do have a little extra part. My presentation got closed down on me, but there is just a last slide there after the demo where I just summarized that we covered the what and why of the date and time dimensions, the benefits to date dimensions, and the kind of things to think about to include in your date dimensions. That's kind of the big thing, is just to get you thinking about all the different things to include. Lots of the comments that I've seen so far have brought up some even more things that you could actually possibly include too. So I think there's no end to the columns you can include in a date dimension. And then just to leave you with that little TARDIS thing again as well. That's just to remind you the 50th anniversary was last year, and other than that, thank you all for attending the session. Look forward to hearing from you in the future.
Thanks, Steve, for doing the presentation. And as we mentioned earlier, the recording will be available on the PASS BI virtual chapter site. It usually takes upwards of a week to get it all prepared and posted and such. So go ahead and take a look for that in about a week. And again, thanks, Steve, for your presentation. Hope you all have a good day.
Thank you all.